This is my true story. I raised my daughter with love, care, and sacrifice, but she erased me from her life like I never existed. One day, I heard her tell someone, "He's dead to us." I stood there, breathing, heart still beating, yet already buried by her words. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I stayed silent and began planning. Months later, at my own will reading, she finally saw me again, alive, standing in the doorway. But before that, tell me where you're watching from. And please subscribe so more people hear stories like mine. He had lived his life with one clear purpose, to make sure his daughter never had to struggle the way he once did. Every day started before sunrise. He worked long hours in a small workshop, sometimes fixing things for others, sometimes taking extra jobs just to save a little more. There were days when his hands were so cracked from the cold that he wrapped them in cloth before leaving for work, but he never complained. The thought of his little girl at home waiting for him was enough to keep him going. He dreamed not of riches, but of giving her the kind of comfort he had never known. He used to carry her on his shoulders to school, pack her tiffin, and wait by the gate until she waved back. That wave meant everything. He watched her grow from a small girl with pigtails to a young woman full of life and dreams. He wanted her to reach the sky, and for that, he never hesitated to sacrifice. When money was tight, he skipped his meals so she could eat. When she needed tuition fees, he sold his old motorbike without a second thought. When she wanted new shoes or books, he always found a way, even if it meant staying up all night to work. Her happiness was his reward. Each smile on her face was worth 100 long days of labor. He watched her become the first in the family to graduate, her name printed proudly on the certificate he had framed with trembling hands. He couldn't stop smiling when she got her first job. He walked around the house with his chest puffed out, showing her photograph to anyone who visited. "My daughter," he would say, and that was enough to fill the silence of his empty evenings. When she got married, he was the happiest man alive. He spent every coin he had saved to make her wedding grand, the kind of celebration he could never have imagined for himself. He borrowed a little, sold some land, and even pawned his late wife's jewelry, all so his daughter could have her dream day. As he watched her walk down the aisle, his heart swelled with pride and pain at the same time. He knew she was stepping into a new life, and he hoped her husband would love her as deeply as he did. He gave her more than money. He gave her his faith. Every time she visited, he made sure her favorite food was ready, the room was clean, and the home smelled of warmth. He didn't need anything in return, not gifts, not money, not even thanks. All he wanted was time. Just a few moments where she would sit with him, ask how his day was, listen to his small stories. But slowly, those visits became fewer. The phone calls shorter. The warmth thinner. Still, he defended her. Whenever someone asked why she hadn't come to see him, he'd smile and say, "She's busy. She's building her life." He never wanted anyone to think badly of her. He had raised her to be free, and he wanted her to have her own wings. But sometimes, when the nights grew too quiet, he wondered if he had made a mistake by giving too much, because love without balance becomes a shadow, one that hides gratitude under comfort. He thought of the land he had inherited from his father, acres that once fed them through hard times. It wasn't much, but he had managed it well, turned it into something stable. When his daughter got married, he made sure to add her name to some papers, a gesture of trust. He didn't realize then that generosity without boundaries can invite loss, disguised as love. Even when her tone changed after marriage, he excused it. He told himself it was life, that she was adapting, that her husband's influence would fade, that she'd find her way back. He remembered every small kindness she'd ever shown him, the handmade cards on Father's Day, the smile when she passed her exams, the way she once said, "You're my hero, Papa." Those memories were stronger than pride. So he waited. He waited for visits that never came. He waited for calls that were never made. He waited for birthdays that passed like ordinary days. But waiting, he learned, has a cost. It eats away at the soul quietly, one empty evening at a time. Even then, he kept faith. Because fathers, no matter how broken, keep believing that their children will remember love someday, that they'll turn around, see what's been done for them, and feel the pull of gratitude. But life doesn't always honor hope. Sometimes it breaks it. And yet, even in that breaking, he never hated her. He couldn't. To him, she was still that small girl who once ran into his arms. That's what made the coming betrayal so deep, because it came not from a stranger, not from distance, but from the very heart he had built his life around. He didn't know then that the love he had poured without measure would one day be the same love used to erase his existence. He didn't know that the daughter who once called him her everything would one day speak of him as if he had never lived at all. For now, he simply carried on, quietly, faithfully, endlessly, a man whose world revolved around a memory that no longer existed for anyone else. And that is what made his devotion both his strength and his undoing. It began quietly, as all family cracks do. Small disagreements that should have passed with time, but instead grew into permanent walls. At first, it was about money, then about property, and soon, about everything that once bound them together. His daughter had married into a family that valued status over sentiment, and slowly, their tone became hers. What used to be warm conversations turned into sharp exchanges filled with blame and resentment. She began to speak less like a daughter and more like someone keeping score. Every visit ended with tension. Every word he spoke was twisted into insult. When he asked about the land he had given her, she called it control. When he offered help, she called it interference. The man who had raised her from nothing was now a nuisance in her new world, an inconvenience she tolerated for appearance, not love. He started hearing things from relatives, small remarks that stabbed deep. She complained that he acted like he still owned everything, that he couldn't let go. It broke something inside him to realize that the same generosity that built her comfort was now being used as ammunition against him. The worst came when her husband joined the chorus. He didn't speak to him directly, but his presence said enough. A smirk, a dismissive nod, the polite coldness of someone who believed he had replaced the father in authority. Together, they built a house on the foundation of distance and pride. He was no longer invited to family dinners. His phone calls went unanswered for days. Birthdays, anniversaries, festivals, all came and went without a message or a visit. It was as if he existed only as a name they once knew. Then, one evening, while sitting alone in his small living room, he overheard a conversation between visiting relatives. They spoke casually, unaware he was within earshot. One of them asked about him, whether she still saw her father. Her reply, sharp and final, echoed like a verdict. "He's dead to us." Those 4 words didn't just wound him. They ended something sacred. It wasn't anger that filled him, nor even grief. It was disbelief. How could someone erase decades of love with a sentence? How could she speak of him as though he had already vanished from the world? He sat there, heart pounding, hands trembling, realizing that to her, his existence no longer mattered. That night, he didn't sleep. He walked through the house, touching old things she had once used, the chair she sat on while doing homework, the corner of the wall where her childhood height was marked in pencil, the window she'd wave from every morning. Each memory was still alive, breathing in silence, but she had already buried them in her world. He tried to understand where it had gone wrong. Was he too strict? Too generous? Too trusting? He searched for answers in every detail, but all he found was emptiness. Sometimes love doesn't fade because of distance. It dies because one side stops remembering. By morning, he stopped asking questions. Instead, he decided something quietly. If she had chosen to erase him, he would let her live with that erasure. But not forever. One day, she would face what she had thrown away. One day, she would see that declaring someone dead does not make them gone. It only makes the truth wait, and truth, he knew, never dies. The pain did not strike all at once. It came quietly, slowly, like a chill that seeps into the bones. Every morning felt heavier, every night quieter. The silence in the house was not peaceful anymore. It was heavy, almost suffocating. The chair where she used to sit and talk for hours now stood empty. The phone that once buzzed with her messages stayed still for days. Even the sound of his own heartbeat reminded him that the one person he had lived for had already buried him emotionally. He tried to convince himself that it was just a phase, that maybe she was under pressure, that time would soften her heart. But deep down, he knew that something inside her had changed permanently. The warmth in her voice had disappeared long before those words, "He's dead to us," ever reached his ears. That sentence was not a sudden thought. It was the final declaration of years of distance and resentment that had quietly built up behind his back. He began to replay every moment they'd shared, trying to find the turning point. He remembered the first day she walked to school, clutching his hand, terrified of the world. He remembered staying awake all night when she fell sick, whispering prayers while she slept. He remembered buying her first gold earrings, the way her eyes shined brighter than the jewelry itself. Now, when he closed his eyes, all he saw was her back, walking away, closing doors, and locking him out of a world he once built for her. The loneliness became a new kind of sickness. Meals tasted like dust, mornings arrived without purpose, and nights stretched endlessly. He stopped sitting at the dining table. The sight of her empty chair was too much. He began eating in silence, standing by the window, watching the sky change colors as the day faded. Each sunset reminded him that everything beautiful eventually disappears, whether you're ready or not. Sometimes, the pain wasn't in the memory itself, but in the realization that she might not remember at all. She had moved on. Busy dinners, social gatherings, new vacations. Her world was full, while his was shrinking to the size of a single room. He overheard people talking about her success, her happiness, her growing circle of influence. Not once did anyone mention her father. That omission hurt more than any insult ever could. It meant she didn't just forget him, she erased him. He would walk past her old room sometimes. It still smelled faintly of her perfume. The shelves were lined with dusty photo frames, pictures of her childhood, her graduation, her wedding. He couldn't bring himself to take them down. It wasn't that he wanted to hold on to the pain. It was that removing them would feel like admitting she no longer existed to him either. And despite everything, he couldn't do that. A parent's heart doesn't know how to hate. It only knows how to hurt quietly. He started visiting the temple every morning, not to ask for forgiveness or blessings, but to find peace. He didn't pray for her return anymore. He prayed for strength to live without her. He realized that grief for a living person is worse than grief for the dead. When someone dies, at least you have closure. But when someone cuts you out while you're still alive, you spend every day dying in small pieces. At times, neighbors asked why she hadn't come around. He'd smile weakly and say she was busy, that her work kept her occupied. But when they left, he'd sit by the window, staring at the road, hoping against hope that one day she'd appear, maybe by accident, maybe out of guilt. But the road stayed empty. The ache inside him turned into acceptance. Not the kind of acceptance that brings peace, but the kind that hardens you. He learned to live with the absence like a scar, visible only when light falls on it. His heart no longer waited for the sound of her voice. He stopped keeping his phone by the bedside. He stopped preparing her favorite dishes on weekends. He stopped expecting her, because expectation was a form of self-harm he could no longer afford. There were days when he tried writing her a letter, long, emotional ones filled with love and apology, even though he didn't know what he had done wrong. But each time he reached the end, he tore it up. What could he possibly write to someone who had declared him dead? Words could not bridge a grave. Still, in his heart, a quiet resolve began to form, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. If she had chosen to erase him, he would teach her what it truly means to lose something irreplaceable. He would not curse her or wish her harm, but he would show her that a man's worth cannot be buried by words. The decision did not come overnight. It was built through many sleepless nights, through endless hours of thinking, through tears that never fell. He realized that silence, when used with patience, can become the loudest answer. And so, while the world thought he had grown weaker, something inside him was waking up. A sense of purpose, a plan that would turn her careless sentence into a lesson she would never forget. She had said he was dead to her. He would make her see what it feels like to face the man you buried, alive, stronger, and unbroken. Because a father may forgive, but he never forgets. And when he decides to act, he does not shout. He simply waits, and then moves with quiet precision. The turning point came quietly, not in anger, not in shouting, but in stillness. It began the morning he woke up weaker than usual, his breath short, his joints aching with age and sorrow. He sat on the edge of his bed, sunlight streaming faintly through the curtains, and realized something simple, yet powerful. Time was moving forward, whether love returned to him or not. His body was tired, but his mind was clear. He could no longer waste the years left waiting for someone who had already buried him with her words. It was time to reclaim control, not just of his life, but of his legacy. That same week, he visited the hospital for a regular checkup. The doctor advised him to rest more, avoid stress, and take things easy. He smiled faintly. The doctor didn't know that peace doesn't come from rest. It comes from resolution. That night, he sat at his old wooden desk, the same one where he had signed every important paper of his life, and pulled out a box of documents. Deeds, savings, insurance, investments. Every proof of the life he had built from sweat and sacrifice lay there before him. For years, he had worked to make sure his daughter would never struggle. Now, looking at those papers, he saw them differently, not as gifts, but as tools. The thought came naturally. If I'm dead to her, let me show her what that means. It wasn't bitterness. It was truth. Sharp, clean, undeniable. He realized that everything she had ever wanted still belonged to him. The houses, the accounts, the land, all of it. Her comfort existed because he had chosen generosity. Now, he would choose differently. The first step was simple. He called his lawyer, the same man who had helped him years ago with business matters. The lawyer was surprised to hear from him, but listened patiently. When the old man explained what he wanted, the lawyer stayed silent for a moment, then said softly, "It's all legal. You can do this." They met privately the next day, and together they began going through every file, every clause, every document. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. His pen no longer trembled from weakness. It moved with precision. He wasn't just signing papers. He was rewriting the balance of power. Every stroke of ink was a message to the ones who had forgotten him. You cannot bury someone who built your ground. The plan was not impulsive. It was detailed, careful, and calm. He reviewed every piece of property, every account, and every bond. The lawyer advised him to update his will officially, a process that would take a few weeks. He agreed. He wasn't rushing. Revenge done quietly has its own dignity. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, he grew stronger, not physically, but emotionally. He stopped checking his phone. He stopped expecting apologies. His heart began to understand something deeper. The only way to heal from betrayal is to stop handing your pain to the betrayer. When the will was finally complete, it was a masterpiece of quiet justice. His daughter and her husband's names were removed completely. In their place were people and causes that had shown him kindness. A caretaker who checked on him without asking for anything. A friend who lent him company during lonely nights, and charities that helped old men who were forgotten by their families. He gave special instructions to the lawyer. The will reading must happen 1 month after the announcement of his passing. He wanted her to believe he was truly gone. He wanted her to feel what it meant to lose him, not in body, but in inheritance, in memory, in truth. When the lawyer asked if he was sure, he nodded. She said I was dead to her. Let her see what death feels like when it's real. From that day, he started preparing silently. He arranged his affairs, closed unnecessary accounts, and cleared small debts. He gave away personal belongings he no longer needed, not out of sadness, but to travel lighter. His home began to feel less like a waiting place and more like a closing chapter. He noticed how calm he had become. There was no anger left, no bitterness, only certainty. He didn't hate his daughter. Hate requires attachment. What he felt now was freedom. She had taken away love. But in doing so, she had freed him from the illusions of loyalty that bound him for decades. At night, he would look out the window and smile faintly at the stars. Once, he used to wish for her happiness. Now, he simply wished for peace, for both of them, even if their roads never crossed again. One afternoon, while sitting in the lawyer's office, finalizing the papers, the lawyer asked him, "Do you want her to know about this before?" The old man interrupted gently, "No. Let her hear it when everyone else does. Let her learn the truth with witnesses, the same way she buried me with words." That was the moment everything inside him shifted. The hurt turned into clarity. The weakness turned into resolve. He no longer needed her approval, her apology, or even her love. What he needed was closure. Not the kind given by others, but the kind you give yourself when you decide to stop bleeding for people who keep cutting you. When he walked home that evening, the wind felt different. It wasn't carrying sorrow anymore. It carried quiet power. He sat at his table, had a simple meal, and slept peacefully for the first time in months. The decision had been made, and the rest would unfold naturally. The turning point was not a single act, but a transformation. He had gone from a man begging to be remembered to a man choosing how he would be remembered. His daughter may have erased him in her world, but in his final act, he would write his own ending, one she could never forget. And in that stillness, beneath the calm surface of his heart, one truth echoed like a prayer. Some lessons are not taught by love, they are taught by absence. Preparation became his peace. The old man no longer waited for phone calls or forgiveness. His days were now measured by quiet actions, deliberate and precise. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, brewed a small cup of tea, and reviewed his list of tasks. His lawyer had left him with folders of documents neatly organized: property deeds, account statements, investment records, and insurance details. He studied each line carefully, not as a grieving father, but as a man preparing for a reckoning. He spent hours organizing what decades of work had built. Every signature, every title, every asset was proof that though they had declared him dead, he was still the backbone of everything they stood on. Each page he turned was like reclaiming a piece of himself. His lawyer had told him, "You're in full control. They won't expect this." That sentence echoed in his mind, not as comfort, but as motivation. He began transferring ownership quietly, making sure no trace of his intentions leaked out. His bank visits were discreet, his movements careful. The clerk saw him as an aging man sorting his affairs, not realizing the brilliance behind those tired eyes. In truth, he wasn't dying. He was preparing to live freely for the first time, without being tied to those who had buried his dignity. His daughter and her husband had grown used to power that wasn't theirs. They believed the inheritance was secured, that the old man would fade quietly. They did not know that each smile he gave them during the final visits was a mask, one worn by a man who already knew how the story would end. He met them briefly under the pretense of health updates, listening as they spoke with false sympathy. Inside, he stayed still, letting them dig their own arrogance deeper. At home, he began sorting his belongings, one pile for memories, one for the world to forget. He burned the old clothes she once bought for him as gifts, the ones she used to show off generosity while quietly humiliating him in public. Watching the fabric turn to ash felt cleansing. He didn't need symbols anymore, he only needed actions. The following weeks became a ritual of closure. Each morning, he walked through the house, locking drawers, sealing envelopes, leaving nothing undone. He sold off small investments, liquidated old shares, and funneled the funds into new accounts under his control. His lawyer had taught him how to ensure confidentiality, new signatories, hidden trusts, airtight conditions. His daughter would receive nothing, not even a clue. Then came the hardest part, rewriting his will. He sat with the lawyer and dictated each word slowly. The lawyer typed carefully, his expression half respect, half admiration. The man didn't ask for sympathy, he only wanted precision. Line by line, he erased the names of those who erased him. In their place, he added the ones who had shown real care, a caretaker who checked in weekly, a gardener who fixed his fence without payment, a charity that built homes for abandoned elders. The world had turned cold, but kindness still existed in unexpected corners. He would reward that, not bloodline greed. Once the document was done, he read it twice, each word hitting like a heartbeat. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was balance. The universe doesn't always punish betrayal, but men can ensure that justice still has a voice. After the will was signed, witnessed, and sealed, he requested one final clause, that it be read aloud to his family in the presence of every relative exactly 1 month after his passing. He instructed his lawyer to make the announcement quietly, through whispers and sympathy. He wanted them to arrive dressed in sorrow, expecting wealth, not truth. In the days that followed, he practiced living like a ghost. He told neighbors he was planning to travel for treatment. He closed his phone account, sold unnecessary furniture, and transferred utility bills out of his name. One by one, he erased himself from the paper trail of the living. He wasn't running, he was resetting. At night, he slept soundly. For the first time in years, he wasn't haunted by the sound of disappointment or betrayal. Instead, he dreamed of freedom, the kind that comes when you no longer owe anyone an explanation. He wrote small notes to himself. Dignity is not inherited, it's earned, and it's defended in silence. He didn't hate his daughter anymore. Hatred requires energy, and he had given her enough of that in his lifetime. What he felt now was something deeper, a quiet detachment that comes when love has run its course. He had done his part, the rest was hers to face. When the lawyer confirmed everything was finalized, he simply said, "You've built something irreversible." The old man smiled faintly. "Good," he said, "because so was her sentence. He's dead to us." The next morning, he packed a small suitcase, clothes, documents, and a single framed photo of his wife. He left a letter on the table for the lawyer, instructing when to deliver it and to whom. Then, without a word to anyone, he locked the door to the house that once held his life and walked away. He didn't know exactly where he would go, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that when they gathered for the reading of his will, expecting inheritance and comfort, they would instead receive the truth, sharp, final, and legal. Because some lessons don't come in words or emotions, some come in signatures, sealed envelopes, and the silence of a man who stopped waiting to be loved. And as he stepped into the dawn that day, he whispered one final thought to himself. They declared me dead. Now they will attend the funeral they created. The news of his death spread exactly the way he had expected, quietly, efficiently, and without question. The lawyer handled everything with precision, following the written instructions left behind. A short obituary was placed in the local paper, respectful, brief, and believable. Mr. Arjun Patel, age 79, passed away peacefully at home, it said. A few neighbors visited the house, their faces drawn with sympathy. His daughter didn't shed a tear. Instead, she called the lawyer the next morning to ask about the will reading. Her voice, calm and practiced, revealed her true concern. She wasn't mourning a father. She was anticipating a fortune. In the following days, whispers grew louder. Relatives called her to offer condolences, while some quietly asked about property. Her husband handled the conversations like a man expecting good news, his tone soaked with greed. "Yes, the estate was in his name," he said proudly. "We'll take care of everything." But what neither of them knew was that the care they had refused in life was about to haunt them in death. The lawyer arranged the reading of the will at his office, a polished room with heavy curtains, leather chairs, and quiet air conditioning. The date was set for exactly 1 month after the death notice, just as the father had requested. Invitations were sent to relatives, friends, and key witnesses. Each envelope carried weight, not just in legal importance, but in moral reckoning. Meanwhile, miles away, the old man watched the world mourn him. He had relocated to a distant hill town where nobody knew his name. The place was quiet, wrapped in mist and pine scent. Each morning, he read the newspaper and smiled faintly as he came across the small obituary. It felt strange to read about your own death and feel nothing but calm satisfaction. For once, he wasn't living under anyone's shadow or judgment. He was free. He followed no routine, yet everything he did carried purpose. He walked early, tended to small plants, and drank his tea slowly, savoring every moment of solitude. He no longer checked his phone. The silence that once hurt him now healed him. He understood something profound. Being forgotten by the wrong people is a blessing, not a tragedy. In the city, his daughter began preparing for the will reading as though it were a ceremony. She chose her outfit carefully. Subtle jewelry, a somber sari, the perfect balance between grief and grace. Her husband rehearsed lines of false sorrow, planning what to say if the lawyer asked questions. Together, they imagined the wealth they would soon control, the properties, the bank accounts, the farmland, everything they once distanced themselves from. They even began discussing renovation plans for the old house, laughing quietly between sips of expensive coffee. Relatives whispered that she had been the dutiful daughter, caring for her father until his last breath. Lies spread easily, and she didn't correct them. She let the world believe she had been loyal. Her husband, more arrogant than wise, called a few close friends to boast, "We'll handle the estate soon." It's all sorted. They didn't realize that everything they assumed was already slipping through their fingers. The day before the will reading, they visited the lawyer's office to confirm the schedule. He greeted them politely, but gave nothing away. His expression was calm, professional, unreadable. As they left, the daughter turned to her husband and said softly, "Tomorrow changes everything." She was right, just not in the way she imagined. The night before the reading, the old man sat by the window of his small rented home, watching the sunset. The sky burned with orange light, fading into purple shadows. He felt no anxiety, no second thoughts. He had already let go of anger. Now, only justice remained. He wrote one final note, sealed it, and placed it inside his jacket pocket. Tomorrow, when he stepped back into their lives, it would not be as the father they ignored, but as the truth they tried to bury. At dawn, the city began to stir. The lawyer's office prepared for the event. Papers organized, chairs aligned, the will placed in a clean envelope at the center of the table. By mid-morning, the guests started arriving. His daughter entered with her husband, nodding solemnly at familiar faces. Her smile was soft, her tone perfectly balanced between sorrow and anticipation. Every word she spoke dripped with controlled emotion. But even as she spoke of her late father's kindness, something about the room felt strange. The lawyer was unusually calm, his eyes sharp and distant. A few relatives exchanged quiet glances, sensing tension they couldn't explain. The air was thick with expectation, but underneath it all, something heavier waited to unfold. Far away, the old man dressed carefully, a dark suit, clean shoes, combed hair. He looked at himself in the mirror, older, thinner, but steady. There was no trace of fear in his eyes, only finality. The world believed he was dead, but today he would walk back into that lie and dismantle it brick by brick. He took a taxi to the city, the ride long and quiet. Outside the window, life moved as usual, people rushing, cars honking, shops opening. None of them knew that inside one man's calm silence was a storm of truth waiting to be revealed. He reached the office just before noon. The lawyer saw him through the glass door and nodded faintly, the signal they had agreed upon weeks earlier. Inside, the reading had begun. The daughter and her husband sat confidently, listening as the lawyer opened the will and began to read. Their names never came up. Confusion flickered across their faces, then irritation, then unease. Whispers spread among the guests. The lawyer continued reading, his voice even and deliberate. Then came the final line, the one written by the old man himself. "To those who declared me dead before I was gone, consider this my reply." At that moment the door opened. The old man stepped in. The room froze. Every eye turned toward him, some wide with disbelief, others trembling with guilt. His daughter's hand flew to her mouth. Her husband's chair scraped backward. For the first time in years, he didn't feel small or weak. He didn't feel like a forgotten man or a dismissed father. He felt alive, completely, undeniably alive. The dead had returned, not for revenge, but for revelation. And as silence filled the room, he realized that sometimes the best way to expose betrayal isn't by shouting. It's by walking into your own funeral and breathing. The air in the lawyer's office had turned heavy, so heavy that even breathing seemed loud. The old man stood silently near the doorway, his cane steady, his posture tall. For a long moment, no one moved. It was as if time itself had frozen between disbelief and recognition. His daughter stared at him, eyes wide, face drained of color. Her husband leaned back slowly, the arrogance melting off his expression. Around them, relatives whispered in confusion. Some gasped, others covered their mouths. The lawyer, calm and prepared, cleared his throat softly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone professional, "this is Mr. Patel, alive and present to verify his will." The silence cracked open like thunder. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Someone dropped their pen. The daughter stood halfway, trembling. "This can't be," she whispered under her breath. But it was. The man she had declared dead, the father she had erased from her world, was standing right before her, living, breathing, watching. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. Every eye in the room moved from the daughter's pale face to his calm expression. The lawyer resumed reading, his voice steady, the words slicing through the tension like a blade. Line by line, the will revealed itself, each clause carefully written, each name placed with purpose. The daughter and her husband waited, hoping to hear their names. But as the pages turned, their hope began to dissolve. The properties, the savings, the land, all assigned to others. Charities, caretakers, and distant relatives. A trust for elderly farmers. A donation to a children's education fund. Their names never came. The lawyer read the next section slowly. "To those who believed I was dead before my heart stopped beating, let this document serve as my voice, a reminder that respect, once lost, cannot be inherited." Gasps rippled through the room again. Her husband clenched his fists, his knuckles white. The daughter's lips trembled, tears threatening, but never falling. Her father's eyes, calm and unblinking, met hers. He didn't show anger, only a silence deeper than words. The lawyer continued, turning to the final page. "To my daughter, who once said, 'He's dead to us,' I leave a single truth. I was never dead. You only buried your conscience." A hush fell over the room. For a moment, even the sound of breathing disappeared. The lawyer set the paper down, folded his hands, and looked toward the old man. "Sir," he said softly, "would you like to say something?" The father stepped forward, his cane tapping softly against the marble floor. The sound echoed like punctuation, sharp, final. He stood before the long table, where his daughter and son-in-law sat stunned. He looked around the room, at the witnesses, at the relatives, at the lawyer, then finally at the woman who once called him a burden. He took a slow breath, the weight of years resting on his shoulders. Then, with a voice that trembled not from weakness, but from power, he spoke. "I was never gone," he said quietly. "You just stopped looking." The room fell completely silent again. Some people turned away, unable to face the scene. Others watched, mesmerized by the calm fury in his tone. He didn't raise his voice, didn't accuse. He simply told the truth, the kind that doesn't need defending. He turned toward the lawyer. "You may proceed," he said, and returned to his seat in the back of the room. The lawyer nodded and began finalizing the session. The daughter tried to stand again, to speak, but words refused to come. Her husband reached for her hand, but she pulled away, humiliated. She realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about exposure. Everyone now knew what she had done, what she had said, what kind of person she had become. One of the relatives leaned toward another and whispered, "She said he was dead." The whisper traveled like fire, filling every corner of the room. No one defended her. No one pitied her. Truth had a way of clearing the room of sympathy. When the reading concluded, the lawyer stood and announced, "As per the will's terms, the inheritance is now final. All distributions will be executed as listed. This document is legally binding and cannot be contested." The daughter's knees buckled slightly. She sank back into her chair, face pale, eyes hollow. Her husband muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. The father rose quietly. Every head turned again. He walked to the lawyer's desk, signed the acknowledgment paper confirming his presence, and slipped the sealed envelope he had carried into the lawyer's hand. It contained a letter, his last instruction, to ensure the final transfer of remaining funds to the charities mentioned. Then, before leaving, he turned once more toward his daughter. Their eyes met for the last time. There was no anger left, no desire for forgiveness, only truth, standing tall and complete. He gave a small nod, a gesture that said everything words could not, and turned away. The cane tapped against the floor again as he walked out. Tap, tap, tap. Each step was slow but firm, like the sound of justice being carried out in rhythm. No one dared to stop him. The door opened, the light outside flooding into the dark room, and then he was gone. Behind him, the daughter broke down. Tears came too late. She whispered through sobs, "He was alive. He was alive." But no one comforted her. Even sympathy had walked out the door with him. Her husband sat beside her, expression blank, a man realizing too late that greed had burned their future to ash. Outside, the old man stepped into the afternoon light. The sun felt warm, steady, alive. For years, he had been treated like a shadow, a burden, an afterthought. Now, standing on the steps of the building, he felt weightless. He looked up at the sky and smiled faintly. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. The world had declared him dead, but he had walked into that lie and made the truth undeniable. And as the door closed behind him, leaving whispers and regret in its wake, one quiet truth lingered in the air. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud. It's the sound of your footsteps walking away from the ones who buried you too soon. The moment the old man left the room, silence collapsed like a wave. The lawyer quietly closed the folder, the papers still warm with his client's signature. The hum of the air conditioner and the faint tick of the wall clock were the only sounds that dared to exist. Everyone else sat frozen, eyes shifting, breaths held, shame painted across every face. His daughter was the first to break. Her chest heaved with shallow breaths, her hands trembled on the armrest,